Welcome to another episode of the Lead Venture Thriving at Work podcast. My name is Sabina Lammert and I will guide you today through a visualization that I created some years ago. The topic of the visualization is Reshaping the Future of OKRs, 10 Current Trends and Their Impact. And it's based on a presentation by Natalija Hellesoe and Cansel Sörgens. The two of them are OKR experts, so this is really like their main focus topic. I'm also implementing OKRs in organization, but I'm doing like many different things, many different methods, and adjusting to my clients' need. So I was really happy about their presentation and that we cooperated in creating a visualization for that together. Objectives and key results are a method for implementing a strategy in a top-down, bottom-up approach. I will today not go through the basics of objectives and key results. I will just assume that you know the basics of objectives and key results, as the main focus today is to guide you through this visualization. And as you can see, there are 10 trends, 4 positive trends and 6 negative trends that Natalija and Cansel have observed. And I will guide you through those 10 trends and also give like a few examples from my personal practice and experience with OKR. Let's start with the first trend. So when it comes to OKR, there is a challenge in writing down the objectives and writing down the key results. So usually the objectives are rather like a goal where you want to be. It's your objective. It's a qualitative statement, whereas the key results are usually quantitative. So you try to make it measurable. And people often get lost in this making things measurable because sometimes it ends up being like artificially measurable. And then they feel quite odd, those objectives and key results. And one trend that Natalija and Cansel have observed is that there's a moving from output based to outcome based OKRs. So, what does this mean? Instead of putting artificial numbers on objectives and key results, it's better really to think about what will be the impact. Let's try to find key results that will truly lead to a change that we can feel in our day-to-day work, that we can observe in the business as fast as possible, instead of creating concepts, but also instead of artificially kind of calling 3,000 clients, but with low quality, just because we want to have a number behind an action. So this is quite a nice trend. And there's a tip that the two of them gave, which is, what does success look like for us? And not to be too dogmatic about the formulation. And this is also an experience that I made when I first introduced OKRs to a client. I was really super motivated to make the objectives and key results as perfectly formulated as possible, but this is actually killing the motivation and the spirit, especially if people are doing it for the first time. And by now I changed my approach for introducing OKR away from making it perfect the very first time towards to making it easy and fun and allow the team members, the organization, to make also smaller mistakes and then to reflect at the end of a cycle by themselves to find out what can we improve. And usually after 1, 2, 3 cycles, they come up with a good OKR approach that also fits the organization. You just need to allow them, to give them some space for making mistakes and to introduce improvements by themselves. And this makes also the method more acceptable compared to let's introduce it in the most perfect way possible the very first time. The challenging part here is actually to convince whoever the company leader is or whoever wants to introduce OKR that we need a few cycles of actually playing around with OKRs, of making first experiences, and that it just takes some time. And that's normal. We cannot start where other mature OKR companies arrived after some years. So a very, very important first positive trend, and people are getting away from this dogmatic formulation of key results, and I'm observing the very same trend. Then, the next one, a negative trend. It is really something very negative. Using OKRs without having a proper strategy. I once introduced OKRs in a company, and they said, and it was 2019 in November, that they created a strategy, that they want to stick to that strategy. But when we started to introduce OKR, it was April 2020, which means we were in the beginning of the pandemic. And so the strategic goals that they decided in November were not the most important things to do in the moment of the pandemic. However, they invested so much time in this initial strategy, they defined 50 goals, that there was too much hesitation to let go of it. And so they created a first OKR cycle based on this outdated goals, despite all the advice I gave them. And I was like, okay, but you're taking over responsibility for that. And they wasted an entire cycle. It didn't work out because naturally the more important strategic topics popped up, like actually providing laptops to all employees, for example, because not every employee had a laptop back then, but everyone was forced to be in home office. And those things, they just naturally got a higher prioritization, and the defined OKRs based on those outdated goals were not valid anymore. So it's very important to build, as it's written here in a tip, OKR on a solid foundation to avoid misuse and frustration. And at the same time, question yourself, is this foundation, is the strategy that we have defined, even if it has only been 1 month ago, is it still valid? And of course, sometimes you have a strategy, it seems to be valid, it seems to be the best thing, you define your OKRs based on that, and after a month, things change because the world is super, super fast paced. And in this case, you have to allow yourself also to adjust the objectives and key results. Positive trend number 3. Defining a useful cadence. What is meant with that? So initially, OKRs are described as quarterly goals. So you have quarterly cycles that are actually paying into some sort of midterm goal and then paying into the strategy. However, every organization is different. There are fast-paced organizations, there are slow-paced organizations. There are organizations working in fast-paced environments and others that work in slow-paced environments. And you have to adjust the cycle length and also the cadence of the weeklies or check-in meetings, however you want to call it, to the conditions in the company. So you really have to find an individual way and to be open to adjust to that. It's not about following the blueprint from a book. It's about making it a fit for your purpose in your company, in your organization. And also here, there is a tip. Balance effort and impact with market dynamics and organizational realities, basically what I just said. So it's nothing, you cannot define the perfect rhythm of your OKR cycle right in the beginning. You have to start with an experiment. And after the end of one cycle, you have really to reflect, was this good? Do we need to adjust it one or the other way? And it takes a few cycles until you find a good cadence. And then it might be good for a while, and it could be needed that you actually change it one more time again or multiple times. So try to get into resonance and to observe what is happening. Does the pace fit to how we're working and what our current challenges are? Trend number 4, again, a negative trend, which is creating OKR as a parallel universe in the execution. So this is something that Natalija is like very eager to do. When she works with objectives and key results, she really puts it into an entire organization system and makes sure that it's aligned with the projects, with basically everything there already is, so that everything is really getting into another paying into the different things and into the overall strategy. And this is something that I agree that this is important. I usually don't do it in the very first cycle as well, because what I have experienced is that working with transparent goals together as a team in a rhythm, talking about it weekly or every 2 weeks is already enough of a challenge in the beginning. So usually what I do during a first cycle is just to make people, to get them familiar with this approach of working. It's like super soft. I try to implement it to whatever there is, and then we are kind of observing, are there projects? How do we deal with that? Like on and on with the occasion that is occurring, and then we try to find out solutions, because it's really difficult, especially in organizations that don't have an already set up proper project structure, to find the right initial setup. And this takes a lot of effort. However, it is really important that OKRs are not a parallel universe, that you in the end aim to find a solution where you have your project, you have your daily routine, and you have OKRs, and everything is working together, and you have some sort of dashboard or some sort of meeting where you really have an overview of everything, and it just makes sense how things are working together. So the tip here is to integrate your OKR system in the bigger context of your organization and processes. Just see where you're starting with the organization, and try to not overwhelm the organization with objectives and key results initially. Try to make people first familiar with the way of working, and usually then afterwards they're more open to also find solutions by themselves on how to integrate everything together. Because the challenge for us as external consultants is that we never have the entire knowledge. Doesn't matter how much we ask, how much we actually try to visualize to create an overview. We are not members of the organization, so we rely on the knowledge of the organization, and the organization first has to make also some experiences with OKR so that we can find a proper individual solution. Number 5, another negative trend: using OKRs for everything. This is something, that can happen, that there's a project, oh, let's make an objective and key results out of it. There's a routine work that only is actually depending on one single department. Let's make an objective and key results out of it. And there can be reasons to make a project an objective and key results where you are like, okay, let's do it for whatever good reasons there are. Same as for routine work, you want to make it transparent. You have to implement a new system. The entire organization will be impacted, and everyone has to pay in a bit to make the transition from one system to another smooth. So there are use cases. But what you really should focus on when you work with OKR is strategic and development topics. So topics that really require the collaboration of a larger part of the organization, where you really want to create a movement throughout the organization towards a specific goal. And my experience shows also in the beginning, when you work with the first 1 or 2 objectives and key result cycles, the teams tend to rather work on smaller, less cross organizational goals, and then it develops to more and more complex goals where really everyone is needed. And that's also fine. As I said, like initially, just this different way of working is already challenging, because usually people are not sitting there and waiting and being like, oh, I just worked like 70% and now OKR is coming and now I can invest my remaining 30% on that. This is usually not the case, but quite often people are already at their limit and now a new way of working comes. So it is also important to try to find a good approach that doesn't paralyze the organization. Number 6, another positive trend, is to mix it up. So cross-functional goals, cross-functional OKRs, shared OKRs, and also other type of OKRs. So there are different type of OKRs. I just mentioned those cross-functional ones where you need also like different organization parts to collaborate, to work together. And it's not about, and we will come to that later, about cascading the OKRs down into the organization, but we still stay in silos. It is really about thinking, where can we create an impact? Where can we make a difference in the organization? Where do we need to align ourselves? It's really about alignment. And for this, different type of objectives and key results are needed. Some are department specific, but require visibility because everyone has to kind of pay into it. Some are really cross-functional. Some might be at a certain point also some project that needs specific attention because it's like super, super strategically important. And don't just copy paste as it's written here your org chart into your OKR approach, but try to think about what makes sense. And again, give yourself a few cycles of time. You will come with very great ideas for that, especially after a few cycles. Like in the beginning, when you start working with OKRs in a classic organization, you cannot expect too much bottom-up ideas to come up. But after a few cycles, the creativity is really exploding because then employees are feeling, oh, I have actually an impact on where we're heading to. I can place my ideas, my insights, and it's really a co-creation and a co-guiding through of the organization through whatever there is right now, through whatever the market requires. So don't copy paste. This is very important. It takes more time to come up with an individual solution, of course, but it will be the better one. And also you have to train yourself and your organization to become better in reflecting and resonating with what's there. Number 7, and another negative trend is the critical role of internal OKR coaches, process owners, and ambassadors. So these are 3 different roles. Like the OKR coaches are the people who will facilitate the OKR process, who are behind making sure that basically the confidence level was written in the Excel sheet or whatever you use, what type of program, or into your planner. And they also make sure that the meetings are set up, that the infrastructure is ready. If people feel kind of overwhelmed with OKRs, they can also ask, hey, how does it look? Maybe we need to adjust something. Then there is the process owner. So there are multiple coaches, but there's a process owner who is actually taking all the feedback from the coaches, but also in the different meetings, and thinking about, does the process still make sense the way we initially set it up, or do we need to adjust the process somehow? And then there are ambassadors. Ambassadors could be someone on the C-level, people who are supporting the progress of OKR, the work with OKR, who are kind of promoting the entire work, who are behind it. And this is also quite important, especially if OKR was initiated from the employees and not from the C-level. It is really important to define those clear responsibilities and to invest in practical knowledge and adaptation. This process owner that I just mentioned is the one who will help to find an appropriate cadence for the organization. And also with the OKR coaches, you want to be independent from external support as fast as possible. Number 8 is the never-ending story of the Big Bang implementations. This is what I also mentioned before, like, oh, there's the book, this is how Google did it. Let's try to implement in the very first cycle an OKR approach that is the final form or where Google was in this book. And this just does not work, because it is a cultural clash. There's so much that we do different for the first time. The communication changes completely, and we need to allow freedom and space for personal development and for actually, a slow cultural change that is not paralyzing the organization. If you stick to the OKR principles, because the OKR cycle consists of a planning, then you do the implementation, then you go into a reflection phase, you have a review and a retrospective, and then you adapt for the next cycle, you think about new strategic goals. It is a continuous cycle of improvement, plan, do, check, act. And if you stick to these principles, if you live according to it, if you give space to people that they share their doubts, that they actually also share insights, make suggestions on how to improve, if you truly listen to it, you will slowly develop into a very perfect OKR approach for your organization and your team. Now we have a last positive trend, and I mentioned that part already. OKRs don't cascade, they align, and more people are developing towards that. So it's not about I'm making like a big goal and it's now cascaded throughout the different smaller parts of the organizations, but instead conversations are more developing towards what are meaningful contributions. Let's do some shared decision making away from command and control, but and also away from siloed goals that are just like in one silo. As I said, it might be like this in the first cycles, and it's okay. We're just getting familiar with the method. But in general, this is not the goal. And the positive trend is more and more people are actually adapting that and changing this approach. Because when you read this book of John Doerr about objectives and key results, it's all about cascading. You have like this big goal, and then people are thinking how we can pay into that and into that. And it's really like a cascading approach. But if you have ever done that, it really feels artificial. So it's quite good to really sense what is the need of our organization and to adapt towards it. And the last one is expecting organizational development without living continuous improvement. I basically also mentioned that. So the organization in the beginning, when working with a method like OKR, needs time to develop. It is a cultural change. And for that, you need to give the organization some freedom. You need to allow failures. You need to allow mistakes, yeah, and to give space for sharing ideas, for finding ways to improve. And there's this prime directive that is used in retrospectives, and it also fits great for OKRs to say, I truly believe everyone did his or her best under the given circumstances. And if this is the way you look at your coworkers, like truly, honestly, then whenever something comes up that didn't work out, for example, you didn't meet the goals at the end of the cycle, you'll be like, okay, and what can we change that this doesn't happen to you or to anyone else? Where can we improve the system, the communication? Can we change the tool? And this is exactly what happened 3 weeks ago with one of my clients. They didn't meet all of their goals, but they were so nicely approaching each other and also suggesting how to actually change the tool, getting away from an Excel sheet, because this was the easiest way to start with, towards using some sort of list. They have a program that they're anyway using for other things, so they can implement it there. And there were those small adjustments were made, and they didn't achieve all of their goals, but they were able to celebrate how their communication has changed and how they're now starting to take over shared responsibilities on their goals, and it's not anymore that one department lead is solely responsible for what happened in his or her department, but they are starting now to also take over responsibility a bit across the other departments, being like, oh, I see you struggle there, can I support you, can my department support you to achieve the overall goals of the organization? And this is really beautiful. So OKRs can be a catalyst for organizational development if you build the right prerequisites and act on your challenges, as it's written here in the tip. And the important thing with OKR, it's the same as with Scrum. When you work with OKR, when you start working with OKR, many challenges will pop up and will become visible. And it's not because those challenges have not been there in the past, but because this way of working gives them space to become visible. It gives them space to be resolved. And usually when you start working with OKR, it's the same as with working with Scrum. You will really see where there are dysfunctions in your organization, in the way you work, and you have the chance to really develop, to improve that, to get rid of one after another, and to consciously and actively optimize the process. So this was the visualization. I hope you enjoyed it. It's on our website on leadventure.de. There you can find tons of visualizations. And let me know if you like this format, like guiding you through some of those visualizations, because we have created so many for different occasions. Some of them were for client workshops, others were just of pure curiosity, others were just for sharing and visualizing some thoughts. And usually when sharing them on LinkedIn, they appear once and then they disappear forever. So the idea is also to use some of those visualizations from the past to give you a bit of context. How did it actually, why did we create it? How do we use it? Some of them we use also for trainings and workshops. And if you find any visualization on our website where you are interested to learn more about, just text me and I can create a next podcast episode also on that. I hope you enjoyed this format. And yeah, I wish you a lot of fun with objectives and key results. Also, reach out to me if you have any questions on how to implement objectives and key results in the most easy way possible, because there I have a huge knowledge base using games, using like different approaches where people who have already had bad experiences with working with goals opened up and are currently also like fully emphasizing working with goals and OKRs. So just reach out. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode and see you for a next one, hopefully.